completed 2 days of a seminar organized by the ACFE, the Association for Certified Fraud Examiners, about how to manage and obtain digital evidence. Walt Manning has been so kind to allow me a few minutes to ask him some questions so I can share them with my users and with my clients. So just to introduce quickly Walt Manning, he is the owner of Techno Crime and a self-proclaimed investigations futurist. I had never come across that term, but it really sparked my interest. So what he basically does is, after a long-term career, which also included being involved in law enforcement in Dallas, Texas, and also working on several criminal and civil litigations all over the world, he now owns a company where he basically looks at new technological trends and how that involves the digital forensic environment in terms of investigating fraud. One question that came to mind over the last few days that I would love to share with my audience is, what do you think are the biggest challenges from a technological standpoint nowadays?
I think that just because the technology is changing so quickly, it's evolving at an exponential rate. And it's very hard for any profession and any professional to keep up with how quickly technology is changing. So I think we're going to see a need for specialization in all types of investigators, and particularly on the technology side. And just keeping up with technology and understanding how it's changing is going to be the biggest challenge, I think, for any investigator in any type of role.
And you mentioned two big keywords, the BOYN and BOYD. Can you tell me a little bit more about that briefly?
BYOD programs it stands for Bring Your Own Device, and BYON is Bring Your Own Network.
Mm-hmm.
So now increasingly over the world, we see employers expecting employees to go out and buy their own mobile devices and to provide their own network connections with those devices. But the problem is that creates significant risk for the employers when the employees use those devices to connect to an employer's network and proprietary confidential data. It also makes it more difficult for the investigators to be able to find the evidence of how those devices might have been used in the commission of a fraud. So it complicates the investigation much more in this environment than we had before.
Because especially from what I was understanding, in the cloud, data aren't stored as long as they would have been if you have a hard drive located at your office, correct?
Well, no, and it could be just the opposite. Data could be stored longer.
Mm-hmm.
It just might be stored in locations that make it more difficult to access, because now it's outside of the employer's control. And the employees can store data in so many different places now with cloud services, that how is an investigator going to know where the data that constitutes their evidence is actually located?
Yes.
So it's going to make the investigations take longer, perhaps be costlier, and make the odds shift in the favor of the criminal, because
yes,
makes it harder for us to find them.
You mentioned, can you give me two examples of like an investigation gone very wrong and an investigation where actually the digital forensic specialist was able to use the new technologies? Two cases come to mind for you.
In investigations gone wrong are investigations where people go in and start looking through computer systems or the data on mobile devices without understanding what impact that has on the integrity of the evidence. Because if you go into any type of electronic or digital investigation and you change the data on the device, you call the integrity of that evidence, if you submit it in any type of criminal or civil litigation, now into question. So you have to know how to do things the right way when you're involved in this type of digital evidence investigation, or you could easily make all of your time and effort worthless by gathering evidence that you can't use in court.
Because the fact is, just simply accessing a laptop or a mobile device can essentially change the metadata embedded into it and change the and falsificate the authenticity, correct?
In fact, if you took a laptop computer that was turned off, not operational, opened up the case, pressed the on button, and just booted the laptop up to the desktop screen. You've changed hundreds, if not thousands, of files on that device just with that access alone. Whether you open any applications, whether you look at any of the data stored on the devices, you've changed the basic data on the device itself. So you're not able to go into court and say nothing I did could have changed the data after it came into my possession. So you really have to have someone with the expertise to know the right way to do this when you're dealing with digital data.
Maybe of a case where you had success in the course of a digital forensic investigation. Can you tell me what kind of role the forensic digital evidence played in the Bernie Madoff case, where I learned you were actually involved in?
In the Madoff case, although it was huge in magnitude, many times we would get requests from law enforcement or from the SEC for documents that they found in print, but they wanted to authenticate electronically, and they wanted to find out where the document was stored, who originated the document, and things of that type. So there was a lot of activity of that type where we supplemented the information they were able to use then in the criminal case against Madoff and his co-conspirators. We also provided them with a lot of archive data historically that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to access because it was stored on old media and archived media that no longer were in active use. So it was a big case, big in scope, and a lot of work, but we were glad to be involved and make a positive contribution that ended up bringing justice to some of the victims in that case.
And just also to have the audience understand, like, how are you actually conveying all this evidence to a judge or to a jury, which is already so difficult to understand in the first place?
And that's one of the big problems, particularly with someone in the technology field, is to be able to explain the technology in terms that everyone can understand, so that they'll understand how the technology was used in the commission of the fraud and why it was used the way it was. And that's the difficult thing, because you can talk about technology using a particular jargon that every person may or may not understand. So you really have to use plain terms, explain it in ways that everyone can understand, and then the judge and the jury and everyone involved in the case will understand how the fraud was committed.
Yes, because you could have a strong case on hand, but if you can't actually explain the technical intricacy, then you actually end up losing the case, more likely.
Very possible.
And just because the slogan of my company is establish better controls, in terms of digital processing, digital evidence, what do you think is a good practice for a small to medium-sized company that they can easily establish and that you often see is not being done?
Well, first of all, you have to understand where the risks are coming from. If you don't understand where the threats are, then you're not able to protect yourself or your company from those threats. You need to understand the basics about computer security and good password management and using encryption for sensitive data and making sure that your data is not hackable on any of your devices or any of the services in the cloud that you use.
Yes.
So there are a lot of issues that are basic security 101 that a lot of people don't know about because they've never had education and had training about it. And I think giving them that information and making them aware of how they can secure their own data is one of the best things any professional can do for a small business owner.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope we were still able to hear without with the background noise. Thank you so much for two very interesting days.